Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Tuesday. Tonight, the Prime Minister's second trip to the Oval Office.
He's a very competitive person, and they talk about things that we don't necessarily agree on, but I think they're going to walk away very happy.
We're going to get the right deal for America, right deal, obviously, from my perspective, for Canada.
Some common ground, but still entrenched battle lines as the Prime Minister sits down with President Trump. In moments, Derek Burney, Goldie Hyder, and Frank McKenna are here to dissect what happened and what didn't. Then, from the Oval to a domestic battle.
He went a little bit far yesterday. I hope he's regretting it. I know he's been ratioed quite badly on his video.
It's not the Danielle Smith show, it's the Canadian team, and we all deserve the same opportunity.
Alberta and BC dig in, trading barbs on the feasibility of a pipeline from Alberta oil sands to BC's northern coast. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith will join us in studio coming up on the program. Then we'll break down the strategy behind it all with our front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Laura Stone will be here a little bit later on this evening. First, though.
I think he's a great Prime Minister. I mean, he could represent me anytime. I will tell you, I'm not saying that because no, he is a very strong, very good leader. He's a nice man, but he can be nasty. He can be very nasty. Maybe as nasty as anybody.
How?
I think Canada, let me put it this way, I can tell you this because I deal with lots of leaders all over the world. He is a world-class leader. He's a good man. He does a great job, and he's a tough negotiator.
So then what's holding things up? If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man, too.
That's how Prime Minister Mark Carney's second Oval Office visit ended as the Prime Minister tried to seek tariff relief and find common ground with U.S. President Donald Trump. After that protracted time in front of reporters, the leaders sat down for a working lunch behind closed doors. We've yet to hear directly from Prime Minister Carney post-meeting, but his Minister for Canada-U.S. Trade, Dominic LeBlanc, had this to say just last hour.
The conversation, as I said, was more detailed than previous discussions. It concluded with the President and the Prime Minister directing us, me and my colleagues, and the President, his cabinet secretaries who were there, Ambassador Greer, Secretary Lutnick, and others, to continue the conversation and to quickly land deals that will bring, we think, greater certainty in areas where the principal areas would be steel and aluminum and energy.
So some increased optimism, as you can hear there, but government sources in advance of this meeting had certainly let multiple news outlets know that there was reason to hope there could be movement on steel and aluminum tariffs, something our own Michael Couture pressed the minister on.
Coming into this, it's been widely reported that the Canadian delegation was hoping for relief on steel tariffs, and it was widely reported and never denied by anybody in the government. So you're not getting that leaving here, and I'm trying to figure out how you can still say that you're happy, and how can you tell Canadians that you've come away from this with a win at all?
I wouldn't purport to correct your question, Mike, but I think I said in the House of Commons yesterday that we don't have an expectation of a detailed deal today. So because some unnamed sources speculated, doesn't change our state of mind when we got here. We hope to make progress. We hope to find the President and his cabinet secretaries fully engaged in finding solutions on priority sectors quickly, steel, aluminum, and energy. People understandably want to see the results, and believe me, so do we.
So what should Canadians take from what did and didn't happen at this meeting? We have a special panel convened for you this evening. Derek Burney was Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister, the late Brian Mulroney, and Canadian Ambassador to the U.S. from 1989 to 1993. Frank McKenna served as Canadian Ambassador to the U.S. from 2005 to 2006. And Goldie Hyder rounds us out this evening. He is CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Hi, gentlemen. It's great to see all three of you. I appreciate you making the time for this conversation on a very significant news day. Mr. McKenna, I'll start with you. Are you surprised at all that there isn't anything to announce as far as movement on those sectoral tariffs is concerned?
No, I'm not surprised. These are very difficult issues, and there are a lot of complexities. I know that going in, the delegation was hoping that they could make a bit of progress, and I think they did make progress. In fact, I had a note from Dominic this morning saying he was going to put softwood lumber on the pile as well, because he knows that I have quite an interest in that, and we wanted to make progress on that. But just to take a moment, I think in the case of aluminum, Canada's position is extraordinarily strong because we're such a major supplier. But in the case of steel, for example, you could be talking about tariff rate quotas. And if that's the case, it would be a complex negotiation to decide what that quota might be, or the amount of the tariff, or whether Canada would back off of its 25% tariffs. And in the case of energy, I suspect we're talking about things like uranium, access to critical minerals, and so on, and what that access would look like. So, no, these are complicated issues, but I actually felt quite encouraged by the tone of Dominic LeBlanc's remarks.
Mr. Burney, what was your impression when you take in the tone and the substance of the remarks between the two leaders and then the comments from the minister later?
Well, I would certainly agree that the tone and the level of mutual respect was quite clear for what the open part of the meeting. I'm less convinced on the evidence of progress because when I listened to Dominic LeBlanc and others commenting on the prospects on aluminum and steel and energy, I didn't find much evidence to support that. Obviously, these are complicated issues. They've been complicated ever since the Americans started this tariff war. But we've had a long time to be dealing with them, and we've had little to show in terms of substantive progress, whereas most of the other countries around the world have settled their problems with the United States, not to their advantage by any means. They all capitulated. But we've made no substantive progress on any issue that I can tell from this discussion. But I do agree that the mutual respect and the tone is one of the most positives I've seen in a long time.
Mr. Hyder, I wanted to ask about the impact of a lack of movement, and I take everyone's point that obviously it's very complex, in that other countries that have made agreements have done so by capitulating to one degree or another. But in the absence of some more certainty, I know that you're very invested in the impact that has had on the economy more largely and the people you represent. What can you tell us about that impact at this point?
Well, look, I just spent the last 2 days with over 100 chief executives here in Canada, and the uncertainty is still the dominant theme. And what we're looking for is something to break through that. I agree with both my dear friends, Frank and Derek, that on the one hand, it's positive vibes are really important when you have an audience of one in the United States. We see that any progress that has been that has occurred for other countries has occurred at a leader-to-leader level. And so if something is going to happen, it's going to happen because Prime Minister Carney is in the room with Donald Trump. We need to make sure that that relationship is solid and strong, and that they can have the kind of conversations that they're having, which were open today. The president was right in saying, we do compete with each other. We do have tariffs on each other. We have protectionism on each of our respective borders to some extent. We do have to also collaborate, though, and what businesses are looking for is a recognition that these trade agreements exist for business to be conducted. They're not a political tool. They're there as a framework for business to deploy capital, shareholder capital, with confidence. That is hard to come by when you have an ongoing tariff dispute in the backdrop of a review and renewal of the USMCA, which they also spoke quite a bit about today. We're not feeling comfortable that the road in which we're heading is a short one, and that will give us that predictability that we so desperately seek right now.
I thought one of the more interesting things to come out, Mr. McKenna, I'd love your reflections on this, from the comments, particularly during the meeting that took place publicly facing between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump was the way in which the president described the relationship as he sees it between Canada and the U.S. And Mr. Hodder referenced this, right? He used the term natural conflict to describe basically competition that exists in a different way than it does with other countries that he's already been able to strike a deal with because of our proximity and because of the interdependence of our two economies. Like, he actually acknowledged that for the first time that I can remember in public comments that he's made. What do you take from that?
Well, I don't happen to agree with it. First of all, I was very happy with his use of the words happy. He said that the Canadians would be very happy after today's meetings. We'll find out in the fullness of time whether that's the case or not. But natural conflict, I question that. You look at autos, for example. It is a very complicated negotiated arrangement between three countries where they all win in terms of autos and parts. And it's fully integrated. We all know the math. Sometimes these parts cross the border 6 or 7 times. Every country wins from this. Remember, we bring something to the table. We have 40 million consumers of autos. Mexico's got 130 or 40 million consumers. So I don't think that that's a natural a natural source of tension. I think it actually works. I'd say the same thing with aluminum. We produce aluminum. They consume aluminum. We produce about 75% of the aluminum that goes to the United States. They consume it and turn it into products there. I would say that that is a very sympathetic relationship rather than an adversarial relationship.
I think Mr. McKenna, Mr. Bernie's comments are based in fact, but I'm not sure that President Trump would arrive at the same conclusion. I say that because there was another example of when he was a reporter asked, hey, what do you make of all these Canadians who are not traveling to the U.S. anymore? A decrease of, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 23%. And his response was, Americans don't want to buy Canadian-made cars. Like, on every occasion he could, he drilled down on what he sees as justification for pursuing this tariff regime, which is onshoring manufacturing of all sorts back to the United States. How ingrained do you think his position on that is? And what are the implications for us on that?
His position hasn't changed. That's the whole point. He doesn't want to see Canadian cars in the United States, even though we've had an agreement on this for, I don't know, more than 50 years. So Trump's view on trade hasn't changed. You saw a vintage performance in the press conference that Americans see every day of the week from Donald Trump. That's the real deal. That's the guy who's in control. And his decision alone will decide the outcome. Everybody knows that. The secretaries are very subordinate to him. They're all serving his agenda. That's the problem we have. I think we've got to take our eyes off the United States for a minute and concentrate on other markets. We have to become more self-reliant. We've neglected Asia. Our prime minister has gone to Europe 6 times now, and I don't see any evidence of progress on trade with Europe. He's going to Asia at the end of this month for an ASEAN meeting. I hope he will do some bilateral meetings in Japan, in Korea, in India. I don't care which one, but we've got to start concentrating on expanding our market beyond the United States. We cannot rely exclusively on the United States going forward. And by the way, I think our provinces have to step up. I read a report the other day that it's more easier to buy British Columbia wine in France than it is in Ontario. That's disgraceful. We've talked for years about reducing interprovincial trade barriers. The federal government is in support, but the provinces have to do their job. Instead of jetting off to Beijing to try to carve their own deal with China, why don't they deal with the problem we have at home? We don't have free trade in Canada.
Last word to you, Mr. Hyder.
Well, look, we should thank the president because he's woken us all up to the things that Derek's just spoken about, the need to diversify. But that's a long-term strategy. Most of it is actually struggling with getting out of our own way here in Canada to build the trade-enabling infrastructure. We have all the trade agreements we need. We'll sign more, that's fine, but we need the trade-enabling infrastructure. I heard a lot about that over the course of the last 2 days, and the Major Projects Office has certainly been announced, and it's a good start. But it's not about building 3 or 4 projects. We need to do a lot more than that. And so a lot of that can come by what we can do to control our own destiny. And as far as the United States goes, let's not lose sight of the fact that, what's not going to change is geography. And we are going to be, and they are going to be our #1 customer. We are going to have to build on that foundation, which means putting an emphasis on reviewing and renewing the USMCA is going to be a critical piece of this, even if it is in the backdrop of someone who may violate it. I just don't know how no deal represents an alternative to where we are today.
Well, as the president said, could be just Canada, could be include Mexico too. So there'll be a lot for us to talk about on that front as well. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for your insights this evening. I appreciate it very much. Frank McKenna, Derek Burney, and Goldie Hyder. We're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, our front bench will be here to talk about the politics of what happened at the White House today. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Laura Stone are with me in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
Will Mr. Carney be leaving Washington with a deal on tariffs?
I think they're going to be very happy. We have a lot of things that we're working on that people don't talk about. They talk about, competitiveness. She's a very competitive person. And they talk about things that we don't necessarily agree on. But I think they're going to walk away very happy.
Donald Trump there letting reporters know he expected Prime Minister Carney to leave the White House happy today. So did he? Here's what Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc had to say after a behind-closed-doors working lunch between the 2 leaders.
I'm more optimistic today after those discussions at the White House than I was when we arrived in Washington yesterday, but recognize that we still have some work to do, but we have an engaged, active, respectful partner in the United States, and I'm optimistic that we can get that work done as quickly as possible.
All right, so how is all of this going to land politically in this country? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about just that. Former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton is here in studio with me. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. And Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, guys. Welcome back, Shakir. We missed you through the month of September. I'm going to start, Dan, with you. The minister is more optimistic. Is that enough politically?
Look, I think we saw coming out of this a sense of optimism towards some substantive reporting on progress out of the States, right? There was certainly a good energy coming out of this. There was a great energy in the room today. There was a clear mutual respect between the 2 leaders. There was a clear collegiality. I think politically, this is the place you want the Prime Minister, right? This is the place he was elected to be. This is the stage he should be on. It's far better than to see him there with Donald Trump, sitting together side by side, working towards some sense of relief for Canada's economy, given the turbulence we've gone through, than to have him in pretty much any other environment, right? So I think politically this is a good day for the government. I think they're probably quite pleased with the outcome. Let's be real, they've sent him into the center of the 3-ring circus and asked him to do high wire acrobatics. And I think if anyone was watching today, they're going to think he did a pretty impressive feat and came out looking, I think, stronger than he did going in.
I think all of that is totally valid, Shakir, and very fair point, particularly when you analyze the Prime Minister, let's say in other environments on other issues. Like this one, it could have gone way worse in the moment, and I think that's just a fact. At the same time, I think something else could be true, that was a huge win 6 months ago in the first visit, and you can see how, given the shifting political dynamics and more pressure from, I think, maybe both some Canadians as well as the opposition, that might not be the exact same conclusion this time around.
Yeah, I mean, we should have higher expectations for the Prime Minister. Just setting the bar as, if you go in there and Donald Trump doesn't rip you a new one, it's a success. That's not good enough anymore. I think Prime Minister Carney needs to show some level of progress. I mean, Dan said it. This was a central issue that he was elected on, to handle these negotiations, to deal with Donald Trump. it's great that they have good rapport. I'll give him credit where credit is due. Seeing him in the Oval Office, that was great to see. They get along very well. But people want to know what's going on and how are we going to get to a situation where either we have a comprehensive agreement or we have lower tariffs. Just continually saying we are making progress. We've had some Senate discussions. I'm not sure that's going to be good enough for Canadians moving forward. I think people want to know, is there a framework to get tariffs removed? Is going to be a quota system? Can we at least get Donald Trump to get to the position where he respects our sovereignty and doesn't talk about being the 51st state? We need to see a bit more progress on these things. And I think right now, I know these things take time. I know negotiations can drag out for a while, but folks just want to know that there's some progress happening and not just continually talking about substantive discussions and, things are going well. We need to see more than that.
It was interesting to watch the minister today, Laura, navigate those questions, right? And I think back to when it was Chrystia Freeland, for example. And I remember talking to some of the people in the office then who said, like, the American side is very upset if you disclose anything publicly. Like, Bob Lighthizer would call Chrystia Freeland and ream her out for saying things publicly. But ultimately, they decided they needed to let out enough to keep the Canadian public on side. You could hear from the minister tonight that they have agreed, he said, with the Americans, basically not to say anything. And the result of that, while I understand the impetus for it, is that, like, we feel kind of in the dark.
Mm-hmm. I think there is a bit of a chill that's set in terms of communications with the public. And you've noticed it since the Prime Minister Carney came in. Dominic LeBlanc used to be a lot chattier, I would say, in public about the state of things, to put it lightly. Now he's quite reserved by Dominic LeBlanc standards. He still has a little twinkle in his eye, but he's not showing his cards in the way that he used to. I think, look, I mean, that could be a sign that they are very close to something, but that could also be a sign that they're somewhat terrified of messing this up, right? And there's a fear here now that this has dragged on. I think there's certainly a fatigue on the part of the Canadian public for the Trump show and kind of the manic push and pull. And is he upset with Canada? Now he seems to like Carney again. Where are we getting with this? It does seem, from what we saw in the Oval Office, that things went well. It does sound like discussions are moving forward. I think if there hadn't been any progress made today, I don't think we would have seen Dominic LeBlanc at all. So I think that does send a signal that something was decided at that table to expedite discussions. Whether that's good enough for the industries that are being hammered by these tariffs, I'm sure it isn't, and the uncertainty is still there. But I do think, broadly speaking, the Canadian public does still give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, especially when you watch, the 30-minute show unfolding before you, and you see kind of how Trump handles all these different issues, and he's kind of ranting and raving. I think most people look at that and say, like, Carney handled himself pretty well in that circumstance.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would add to that is if there had been something really big and substantial to announce, it would have been the Prime Minister tonight talking.
Well, I think it will be when the time comes, right?
But when is the time?
Yeah,
that is the question.
Look, I think there's a lot of there is ongoing anxiety. We felt it for the better part of the last 12 months. Canadians are eager to see a deal. As the Prime Minister keeps pointing out, Canada has one of the best deals of any country that trades with America. We're one of their most significant trading partners. And they're not going to settle for a bad deal. They're not going to come home with a deal that doesn't preserve the best interests for this country.
But they set their own deadlines, to be fair. Like, I get that,
but
then
they're
why
still
they
at the table working
right?
right now, right? I think that's the important thing that we saw.
We have one by X or Y,
Yeah, look, I think the best message I heard from the Prime Minister today was pointing out the trillions that Canada invests in the American economy. Our institutional investors are among the most powerful in the world, the most successful in the world, and some of our pension funds are investing and planning to invest more significantly. The Prime Minister was pointing out that investment over the coming years today, and I think that was the message that gave me the most confidence that they're tracking towards something that will demonstrate the kind of progress that everyone's eager to see. I know there's a strong appetite for it, and I know people are hungry to see it. I would say politically, there was also a need to see the kind of progress that we did see today. We are seeing our leaders together in the Oval Office having this conversation. We are hearing that there are continuing discussions overnight. That is the kind of confidence I think a lot of people are looking for right now. And frankly, I think the Prime Minister's office made the right strategic decision saying it's time to get him back in that room and demonstrating progress that people are hungry to see.
Speaking of which, we're just learning that the Prime Minister will meet with Vice President Vance tonight and hold a working dinner. We'll have more details on that a little bit later on with our Mike Licouture, who'll be live in Washington. Right now, I'm going to take a quick break. Our front bench is sticking around. We're going to go one-on-one with Danielle Smith. She and BC's Premier, David Eby, are engaged in a war of words. The front bench will analyze what they hear after that. Danielle Smith is next.
I think Premier Eby's comments are un-Canadian and they're unconstitutional. I think that the Supreme Court is determined that the reason we have a country and have given trade and commerce power and control over ports and interprovincial infrastructure to the federal government is for exactly this reason, so that a parochial premier isn't able to block nation-building projects.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith in Ottawa this morning calling comments from BC Premier David Eby un-Canadian and unconstitutional after he released a social media video slamming her proposal to back the initial planning stages of a pipeline to the northern coast of his province, calling it fictional. Eby responded this afternoon from the BC legislature.
Give everybody a fair shot. It's not the Danielle Smith show, it's the Canadian team. And we all deserve the same opportunity for the same federal funding for our projects as she does for hers. That's not un-Canadian, that is fair, and there is nothing more Canadian than fairness. That is a core national value.
And Danielle Smith is the Premier of Alberta. Hi, Premier. Good to have you back here in studio. Thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it. You tweeted this morning that the Prime Minister committed to reach an agreement on a pipeline by mid-November. Did he tell you specifically he'd have a yes or no on what you have, come to pitch over the last week and a half by Grey Cup explicitly?
We've been talking about it for a few weeks now, and I had originally asked him if there'd be a way we could come to an agreement by the time I go to Abu Dhabi. I'll be speaking at the ADIPEC conference, which I think would be a really good platform for us to say Canada's back, Canada wants investment. But he has a time frame where he wants to have a new batch of special projects for the major projects list announced by Grey Cup, and that's the time frame that we're working towards.
So he, just so that I'm clear, because we're trying to effort to get a confirmation of that from him, he has said, because I know that's the timeline you wanted, right? And you've expressed that on multiple occasions, but he has said, I'll have an answer for you on this by then.
We'll have the framework of an agreement by Grey Cup. That's what our both of our teams are working towards. And there's a few things that we need to work out still, and that's part of the reason why we just need to do a little bit more of that discussion. Obviously, there's 9 laws that are problematic that have to be either revised or repealed in order to attract private investment. We have to come to some understanding of how we're going to get the Pathways project moved forward. It's a major decarbonization project, and also a commitment to a new revenue source, which is a bitumen pipeline, and the West Coast makes the most sense from the pipeline experts that we talk to. So that's what we've packaged up. Those are the 3 things that we need to come to an agreement on. That's what the grand bargain would be, and I'm very hopeful we'd have an announcement by Grey Cup.
Pardon me. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the other voices in the possibility or probability of that grand bargain, and specifically around David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia. You had some very, very, harsh words for him today. You called him un-Canadian in his opposition to this pipeline. Is that not going too far? I mean, can't someone have an opinion that differs than yours on what economic growth looks like in this country and still very much be a Canadian?
Well, I would just ask you to look at his video, which I think stepped over the line. I mean, it is fine to disagree. I try to find ways in which we can find common ground, and we've got lots of common ground. We've worked together on trying to advance ammonia export. I support his LNG projects. We have biodiesel that is produced in our province that is destined for the BC market. And we've talked about interties and how we would be able to support each other on that. We have a difference of opinion on this, and I do think it's unconstitutional. It has been determined by the courts that these kinds of things, trade and commerce, as well as ports and interprovincial infrastructure are federal issues. And the reason for that is that we can't have a single parochial province blocking the aspirations of another. That's not how we were supposed to function as a country. So it is the very definition of what Canada is that we work together on these things. And so I was disappointed to hear his comments, but in the end, it's up to Mark Carney to make the decision on that. And so that's why I'm working with the Prime Minister.
And I do understand, even characterizing what he said as unconstitutional because of your belief, and I think the Constitution backs it up, that this is federal jurisdiction. But calling him un-Canadian is a very specific way to describe someone who disagrees with you fundamentally on one issue around economic development. Why go that far, and what purpose does it serve?
Well, it was the whole point of why we're having the conversations that we are about tearing down internal trade barriers and finding new markets. It's because because we're all facing a threat from our greatest friend and trading partner, the United States, and the instability he's created that Donald Trump has created in our relationship here. And so we have signed agreements, both among the Western premiers as well as among the national premiers, that will work together to develop economic corridors that include all of the above. It doesn't say we're going to include everything except the products produced in Alberta. And so I would say that the will of the people of Canada is that they want their leaders to work together to try to find those export markets. It's very obvious to me that the best opportunity that we have to find new markets is in Asia. And the way you get to Asia is you have to get your products to the west coast of British Columbia. And so that's the reason why we've identified that, along with those who are advising us, as the best opportunity for us to be able to develop those markets. And I would hope that he would agree and that he would work with us on it.
Do you think he's going to do that when you call him un-Canadian for presenting an opposition at this juncture?
You know, he began it, and I hope he dials his rhetoric back, because I'll be very frank about what I think of premiers who are trying to block other premiers from getting their products to market. So I would say that I think he went a little bit far yesterday. I hope he's regretting it. I know he's been ratioed quite badly on his video, which is a suggestion to me that he's not expressing the views of British Columbians. When we've done our own polling on this, we found that 75% of Canadians do want to see new pipeline access built. And there's only a couple of places that you can go when you're building new pipelines if you want to stay within Canada. One is to the East Coast, one is to the West Coast, and the West Coast just makes the most sense.
And I do understand, like, he deserves challenges over the rhetoric he's employed. And I found, listening to you in response until today, you weren't matching it in a commensurate way. It sounded like trying to dial things down and maybe even attempt some sort of conversation. When did that switch and why?
I would just encourage you to listen to his words. And so I calibrate on the basis of that. But the main thing is, this isn't his decision. This is a decision for the Prime Minister. And the courts have affirmed that as well. So he can, I think he can maybe express his view all he wants, but he's not the ultimate decision maker. I think the decision making comes down to, does the project make sense for Canada? And it does. And we're going to be able to demonstrate that.
Do you not, though, have some empathy as someone who has so voraciously defended things that you feel are in the province's jurisdiction? If I think back, for example, to you or your predecessor, your Jason Kinney, talking about carbon pricing, even when the courts determined that that was an issue where the federal government had jurisdiction, you pushed back and said, no, I feel like this is not in the best interests of my province. David Eby, is he not, despite your disagreement with him, entitled to push back on something that he feels is not in the best interest of people who live in his province? And once again, like, why does that make him un-Canadian? It just feels very far.
He's actively trying to block our ability to access the coast. I mean, we have international law. We have international law that says one nation is not allowed to block another. It's absurd that we would have one province blocking access to another. And yes, of course, and that's how I know that it isn't his jurisdiction. The TMX pipeline was challenged by previous premiers, and the courts determined that this is federal jurisdiction for a reason. Because if we're going to operate like a country, then we have to support each other. And I'm not feeling like Premier Eby is doing that right now. I think that if we're all going to be in this together, it means that when I go south, I talk about germanium and LNG and all of the things that BC has to offer, which I do. I talk about autos, I talk about steel and aluminum, because that's what we're supposed to be doing right now if we're going to operate as a country that supports each other. And I would just like to see the same in return.
Isn't he allowed, though, to consider other interests, right?
He's allowed.
Like that's what I'm saying. You're ultimately saying it's Mark Carney's decision, it's the Prime Minister's decision. So why isn't David Eby allowed to say, hey, I have these constituencies who don't feel like this is necessary. I do feel like getting rid of the tanker ban will have a negative impact on some of the investments we want to see. Like that. I can envision, if the shoes were on another foot, you doing the same thing, expressing the interests of the people of your province as you see them.
No, I've never talked about blockading this Trans-Canada Highway so cart trucks coming in from the BC ports can't get through my province. I've never talked
saying that?
I'm just telling you, it's the equivalent. No, I'm not talking about blockading the CN-CP rail line so that they can't get to BC. I'm not talking about turning off the gas pipeline that takes 5 BCF a day of BC gas through Alberta into the American markets. The whole point is that we have cross-border infrastructure that we all benefit from. And we have to make sure that we maintain that, because otherwise we aren't a real country. If we can't build cross-border infrastructure and we can't get our products to market, then we're violating what it is that the founders came together to build Canada in the first place. And so let's go back to the idea of what Canada is supposed to be. Let's get these kinds of projects built. Let's find new markets. Let's work together on that, and let's address the issues. Like, you can't. The answer isn't no. The answer is, well, here's a particular issue that we need to consider, because every single project, whether it's his copper and coal mines, or whether it's uranium, or whether it's potash, or whether it's anything else, every single thing has an issue that has to be managed. And so we manage the environmental aspects, we manage the Indigenous consultation and equity ownership. And that's actually a more responsible and grown-up way to deal with it, is let's identify the issues, let's figure out how we can manage them, and then let's move forward on working on them together. And that's what I want to do with the Prime Minister. But again, it's the Prime Minister's decision, not the Premier's.
And believe me, I wish I had the Minister of Energy here to ask him what that decision would be. You said, just to pick up on one thing you mentioned in that answer, you said last week when you made the announcement about being a proponent for the initial phase, it's a test of whether Canada works or not. And kind of in the same vein as I'm asking about labeling David Eby as un-Canadian, like, why take it to that level? And ultimately, if you're going to make that kind of threat or ultimatum, like, what happens if you get a no on this? Does that mean that Canada doesn't work? And what does that mean that you do in response?
Well, I can tell you that Albertans are questioning whether Canada works. And I'm not telling anything you don't know. There's a very active group that thinks Canada's broken. And so I suppose I could just go down to the United States and start working with American counterparts to see if we can build more pipelines. They've expressed an interest in restarting the Keystone XL. And I suppose we could maybe sell another 1 million or 2 million barrels a day additional to the United States. But I believed the premiers and I believed the Prime Minister when they said they wanted us to work like a country, that they wanted us to open new markets. And that's what I'm doing. In goodwill, I am going and building the case. That's why I was in Quebec. It's why I'm in Toronto tomorrow. It's why I'm in Ottawa. And it's why I'm going to continue traveling the country, is that when I heard my fellow premiers say that we need to start addressing issues that will allow us to work together to tear down internal trade barriers and get our products to market, this is what it looks like, is that we have hard conversations about the things we need to build. And if it doesn't work, then I guess I'll have to work with the United States. But that then is a failure, in my opinion. That's kind of is a failure of the exercise. The whole reason why we've had this recalibration in Canada in the last 8 months is because people are nervous that we are too reliant on the United States. So changing so that we become even more reliant on the United States seems to be a failure.
When you invoke the separatist sentiment, though, are you threatening in the eventuality, or the possibility rather, that this is a no, that you will throw support behind that endeavor? Like, what is it exactly that will happen if you deem Canada to be broken? And just to push back a little bit, like the construction of TMX, I know you criticize the taxpayer dollars behind that, but ultimately it has had a massive germane impact on the differential, greatly increased the amount of money coming into provincial and federal coffers, right? Like, it's not as though there have been no efforts on the part of other provinces or the federal government to make sure that Albertans see the economic benefit of the oil and gas that sits underneath your province. So to characterize it as such feels unfair.
We have a $6.5 billion deficit. The federal government has a $100 billion deficit. You don't eliminate that by printing money out of thin air. You eliminate that by investing in projects that build wealth. And the kind of things that build wealth are pipelines to markets that want them. If we build a 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the BC coast, that's another $20 billion a year in GDP, 40% of which goes to governments, half to the federal government and half to the provincial government. Why would we settle? Why would we settle with running nothing but deficits? Why would we settle with the problems that we have at the federal level that even the PBO is warning about is getting very dire? We've got to start finding ways to be able to build things again. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make sure that Canadians are on board and understand what that looks like, because we can't have the next 10 years be like the last 10 years. We have to build a lot more of the kinds of projects like TMX for the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, my point was just that there have been some things that have been built. It's not been nothing. I just really quickly, if you don't mind, want to ask you about the teacher strike. How long are you prepared for this to go on?
Well, going on strike is part of the collective bargaining process, and the courts have determined that collective bargaining allows for that right to strike, and so we're asking the teachers to come back. We've offered them a wage increase that would make them, especially after provincial taxes, the highest in Western Canada, $115,000 a year for a 5-year educated teachers at the top of the pay scale. We've 3,000 new teachers, 1,500 new education assistants. We want to deal with complexity, and those are the things that the teachers union told us that their members wanted. Their members turned it down. So it's up to the teachers union to tell us what a new deal might look like. We've had a settlement at the table that the union has taken to their members twice. And
resoundingly rejected, though.
That's, I guess, the teachers union has to go back and find out why they're so offside with their own members.
Are you willing to engage in negotiations that might change the terms of that agreement?
We've said from the beginning to the teachers union that they've got to go find out what their members really want and come back to a table. We have to come back to the table with something. What's the point in having a third negotiated settlement that the teachers reject? I think this is a real sign that the teachers union leadership is kind of out of step with what it is that their members want. They haven't put the items on the table that will get us to a settlement, and we encourage them to do that.
Have you ruled out back to work legislation completely?
Don't have to. We'll see how it goes. I'm really hopeful that they'll actually come back to the table with something that we think we can address to get a negotiated settlement. That would be the preference.
Okay, I'll leave it on that. Premier, really appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith. So what's next in the war of words between herself and BC's Premier David Eby? Let's bring back our front bench, Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Laura Stone. They were listening in. Shakir, I'll start with you on this one. Man, this thing really ramped up over the last 10 days. Like, David Eby was almost shaking today. Danielle Smith is calling him un-Canadian. Like, what is behind this, do you think, from a political perspective?
I think they both have to play to their constituencies. As Premier Smith said, in Alberta, there's obviously a big constituency that wants to see oil and gas moved from that province to Tidewater to get to Asia and get to other countries. And I think Premier Eby obviously has in my view, a larger environmental constituency. He doesn't want to see pipelines go through his province. But to Danielle Smith's point, it's not really up to Premier Eby whether or not this happens. Prime Minister Carney is going to have a tough decision. And I think for him, the politics of what he has to do if he's agreeing on that pipeline might have severe consequences. I think for him, it's okay for Smith to put forward this proposal, present this business case, and see what happens next. But for the pipeline to actually be viable, it's going to take private sector investment. And I gather from what Premier Smith is saying, to get that private sector investment, you're going to have to change a lot of regulations around the oil and gas emissions cap, Bill C-69, and a lot of other things that I think for Prime Minister Carney is really going to alienate a part of his base that supports his party quite significantly in elections and whatnot. So we'll see if he's willing to take that step. The one thing I would say is he's shown himself to be a very pragmatic individual. I'll give him credit on that. Where we had Prime Minister Trudeau, who said, there's no business case for LNG to get to Europe. Carney comes in with Minister Hodgson, and they have a business case to kind of make that happen, very forceful in that way as well. So I think if Premier Smith can put forward a case, show the numbers make sense, and get the investment behind the project, I do think Prime Minister Carney would be a pragmatic person and kind of move forward and advance that, despite the political consequences he will suffer from doing that.
There are a lot of politics, though, involved in this, and you can see just from the rhetoric that's being employed, Laura, by both of the premiers. Premier Smith also put this very distinct timeline on everything. She expects an answer from the Prime Minister basically in about 6 weeks. What kind of a political headache do you think that will be for him? You're on mute. There you are. Sorry, start
am
again.
I back?
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah. When I was watching your interview, Vashti, I thought this is a literal nightmare for Mark Carney to navigate this, and we had all kind of talked about it in when the major projects idea was first getting off the ground of the provinces sort of eating each other, trying to gain access to the top of the list, trying to pitch their top projects for their own jurisdictions. And we're sort of watching it unfold in real time. I think this conflict was obviously a slow burn. The idea of a pipeline had been discussed prior to the initial list being unveiled. And, Eby tried to sort of wave it off as not realistic in the moment. Obviously, he's seized with this idea of Danielle Smith and some companies kind of pitching their own idea, and she obviously wants the regulatory environment to change. I think it's quite notable that for now the Alberta Premier's ire is not directed at Prime Minister Carney; it's directed at David Eby. So obviously there's been some hope given to her in her province from on the federal level that this could possibly happen, and that this grand bargain that we all heard about in the summer in Saskatoon could actually come to the fore. So it's going to be very difficult, but we also know that the Prime Minister, doesn't want a project to go ahead against the against what a province has, against what a province wants, right? They have a veto literally in their own jurisdiction, it seems. So I don't know how he's going to navigate this tricky one. I think it's possible that the public will is right now siding more with Danielle Smith than with David Eby in terms of getting these kinds of projects off the ground, and that could potentially cushion the Prime Minister when he makes this final decision.
Sounds like an easy couple of weeks ahead for the Prime Minister. Dan, what do you think is politically at play here behind the scenes that might inform how he navigates it, again, from a strategic perspective?
Yeah, so I'd say, first of all, we have the topic of our first segment, which is everything going on in D.C. today and the conversation with the U.S. president, which is obviously the focus of the government. They were elected to deal with this issue, and that is going to continue to be their focus. I think some progress there will help facilitate his ability in the domestic political environment to navigate some of these really tricky domestic challenges between provincial premiers, particularly when it comes to energy infrastructure. I think on the major projects front, we've seen a great deal of communication from the government over the summer months since they were first elected about the need to get big things built in this country, to show the world that Canada is open for business and this is a good place to invest. They've been smart and wise, I think, so far to include major projects that are a lot less politically sensitive than the one Danielle Smith is trying to advance here, to hang in the window some demonstration of that. And as they continue to roll out those major projects, I saw in your interview the Premier talk about another set that may be coming out this fall. I think we'll probably start to see some more of those trickier political projects. But as Laura points out, I think the Canadian public sentiment is on the side of the Prime Minister on this one. I think that there's a need to demonstrate our ability as a country to do big things, to make big investments like these ones. And so I do think there's an appetite out there where there may not have been in past cycles for projects like this one.
We shall see. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Laura Stone. We're back in a moment with our top story in Washington.
I'm more optimistic today after those discussions at the White House than I was when we arrived in Washington yesterday, but recognize that we still have some work to do.
That's the minister in charge of Canada-U.S. trade, Dominic LeBlanc, speaking after the meeting that took place between U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney. Our senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture, is in Washington covering the trip. And, Mike, you can report tonight that the Prime Minister will sit down with the Vice President for a working dinner tonight.
Yeah, they're supposed to be having that working dinner tonight with J.D. Vance. And I think that's a good sign, Bashi, the fact that he did have that meeting. Vance was in the Oval Office when they had that extended press conference that we were all at. And of course, to continue on with that conversation, I think the Canadian side is seeing this as a very positive thing going forward, to continue those conversations going forward about the relationship that they want to have and what they want to do going forward. And of course, we heard from Dominic LeBlanc there, but also earlier on saying that they had more detailed conversations in the Oval Office and then in that working meeting than he has experienced in the past. And that's why he continues to say that he feels like it is a positive day. But at the same time, Vashi, when you consider the fact that there had been these expectations coming into this, and we had heard from sources within the government that they were hoping for relief on steel tariffs, you have to think that maybe they didn't come away with what they were hoping for in Washington.
All right, we'll see what happens throughout the rest of the night. Thanks so much, Mike. Our senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture, reporting for us live from Washington. We're back in a moment. The Prime Minister continues his trip to Washington, D.C. this evening. He'll have a working dinner with Vice President Vance. That follows, of course, a meeting that took place in a working lunch with U.S. President Donald Trump. We'll keep our eyes peeled for anything tangible that comes out of that meeting. Certainly, the Minister in charge of Canada-U.S. Trade, Dominic LeBlanc, talking about increased optimism coming out, but not a whole lot of details. He says that they've agreed with the U.S. not to disclose the substance of the negotiations, but couldn't promise any tangible progress on any certain timeline. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for any of that. We'll have coverage throughout the evening right here on CTV News Channel. I'm going to leave Power Play there. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Have a wonderful rest of your night.